Biden administration. We need to call out these failures and their woke ideology and their misplaced priorities, especially when it comes to what's happening at our southern border. In their latest Friday night news dump, we found out that the border crossing numbers with illegal immigrant encounters topped more than 250,000 in the month of December. That includes 17 people on the terror watch list and 10 sex offenders apprehended in the Del Rio sector alone. So those are terrible people who have made it across our southern border. And none of that is really surprising considering the policies that this administration and this president have enacted and created this crisis at our southern border. They have allowed it to worsen. They've actually refused to take any action to meaningfully secure our southern border, to stop the surge of illegal immigration, and to take on the cartels who are making billions and billions of dollars off of people, off of the fentanyl and meth that is coming into our country and is continuing to kill Iowans and Americans. Now, earlier this month, we know President Biden met with the President of Mexico, and it was an opportunity for them to finally reverse course on the terrible policies at our southern border and do something to address this humanitarian and security crisis. But what commitments did they publish immediately following that meeting? Topping the list, diversity, equity, and inclusion, climate change, and integrating gender perspectives into disaster response. So that's what they came up with to present to the American people. Americans and Iowans have no patience for these woke priorities while fentanyl continues to poison our people, our children. Terrorists continue to come across our southern border. Sex offenders are coming into our communities. We do not need to be worried about gender inclusivity at our border. We need to be worried about securing our southern border. Americans elected a Republican majority to hold this administration accountable for these continued failures at our southern border, and that is exactly what we will do. That is exactly why you see members here behind me, serving alongside me, making sure we're calling out these failures as they happen. So right now I'd like to hand it over to my good friend from the state of Indiana, Congressman Jim Beggs.
I want to thank Ashley Hinson first and foremost for her leadership in bringing attention to this most important issue, what's going on at the border and the crises that it has caused in the United States of America. Nowhere in the 6 Pillars agreement between President Biden and the President of Mexico is the word fentanyl mentioned by name. Not a single time will you find the word fentanyl in the 6 Pillars agreement. Last year, more than 70,000 Americans died from fentanyl. Logan Bauer was one of those Americans. This is a photo of when I first met Logan in 2018 on the steps of the United States Capitol. He was an exceptional student, athlete, and was only 20 years old when he was poisoned by fentanyl and never woke up. There are countless other stories just like Logan's. That is why 97 days ago from today, I wrote President Biden asking for a meeting to discuss the deadly fentanyl crisis and share with him the more than 100 obituaries that parents who have lost their children to fentanyl sent to my office like this. In the 97 days that Joe Biden has ignored my request to meet and talk about securing our border from the flow of fentanyl, the White House has had time to meet with transgender activists, the Golden State Warriors, and even George Clooney. So that tells you a lot about where the Biden administration priorities are. The fact of the matter is there is a war at our southern border, and right now we are losing it. Last week I co-sponsored Representative Michael Waltz and Dan Crenshaw's legislation creating the authorization of use of military force at our southern border to fight the Mexican drug cartels, who are facilitating the fentanyl crisis at the border. How many more Americans have to die before this administration wakes up? How many more parents have to lose their children? It's past time that we secure the border and put America and our people first. And Ashley Hinson, I appreciate you leading us today to talk about this crisis and how important it is at the outset of a new Congress that we provide the leadership in this House majority that President Biden obviously is unwilling to provide. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague from Texas, Beth Van Dyne.
Through purposeful and persistent actions, the Biden administration has destabilized our southern border and brought about a new era of slavery in America. It's a lie when administration officials claim that they have operational control of our southern border. Mexican drug cartels have control of our southern border. And with that control, they move lethal drugs, terrify human cargo, and commit crimes wherever and whenever they are. The vast tsunami of human trafficking is reaping billions in profits for the drug cartels and condemning countless men, women, and children to slavery in America. Disgracefully, this has all been made possible because President Biden, Secretary Mayorkas, and this administration have chosen to serve as nothing more than transportation assistants for narco-slavery, while they simultaneously berate, demonize, and demoralize the brave men and women of CBP and ICE who should be empowered to stop this ongoing tragedy. From illegal marijuana farms in Oregon, meat packing plants in the Midwest, to prostitution and massage parlors in my own home state, the mainstream press is finally starting to validate what we have been saying about the dangers of Biden's open borders. Narco slaves are being forced to work at gunpoint, sometime until the point of death. Children as young as 13 are working graveyard shifts in slaughterhouses, and little girls are sold into forced sex that they endure day after day after day, just to pay the drug cartels that Biden has empowered. The very people Biden has not empowered are those who have manned our southern border for years. They put themselves in harm's way. They fought the ravages of the drug cartels, and they're dedicated patriots who want nothing more than to do their jobs for our country. But rather than support the men and women of CBP and ICE, Biden, Mayorkas, and the leftists who control our federal government lie about and demonize these brave officers. CBP and ICE deserve so much better. They deserve our support, our thanks, and for what they do and they endure under impossible and disgraceful circumstances imposed on them by this administration. The American people did not vote for chaos. No Democrat campaigned on handing our southern border to Mexican drug cartels. And yet, that's a dire situation that we see every day because of Biden's narco-slavery support programs. It's time people were held accountable. It's time the drug cartels were designated as terrorist organizations. It's time that Democrats join with Republicans to pass the Texas border plan that we've introduced. I'm very proud to be able to stand here today in a new Republican majority, and we will not rest until Biden's era of narco-slavery flourishes in America. Thank you. And with that, I am proud to introduce another proud Texan, Jake Elsey from the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks Ashley and Jim for calling this press conference. I'd like to thank all of y'all for being here today to address this very serious issue, which we have been talking about for a long, long time. The number one job, the primary job of any government, be it municipal, state, or federal, is to protect the citizens that reside there. This administration doesn't seem to take that very seriously. And as a 20-year Navy veteran, the only thing I care about is measures of effectiveness. Currently, there's 1.4 million Americans volunteering to serve our country here and overseas to defend our nation. Yet over the last 2 years of the Biden administration, 4.6 million foreigners have illegally crossed into our nation. 4.6 million. 150 in the last 2 years have crossed over who are on the terrorist watch list. That is 10 times more than came over in the previous 4 years. 105,000 Americans died just last year from drug overdose. 2/3 of those are from fentanyl. Now, if you look back through history and you look at World War II, 416,800 Americans died in 3.5 years defending our nation and fighting tyranny overseas. That's 305 Americans who gave their lives every day in World War II. Every day, in our backyards and in our bedrooms, our families, 18 to 45, we're losing 287 Americans every day. The 4.6 million came over with the help of the cartels. The 105,000 are dying because of the cartels. And finally, young boys and girls, men and women are being crossed and sold into slavery for the sex trade in the United States of America. All controlled by the cartels. And you know what this administration is not talking about when they're talking about what's going on at our border with the Mexican president? The cartels. It is time we declared the cartels a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States and treated them as such. Because if this were a war, we'd be losing it. And make no mistake, they're fighting us every day. So now I'd like to hand it over to a fellow Naval Academy graduate, a man who defended his country for 8 years as a surface warfare officer, Nick Lalata from New York.
I want to thank Ashley Henson for her leadership on this very important issue. I represent a suburban district in Long Island. We're about 2,500 miles from the southern border, but in New York we are a border state as well. We're a border state for two reasons: because of this administration's weak policy at the border, and because of blue state sanctuary city policies, which attract folks across the border every day. It's become the cause of the number one cause of death for the folks between 1845 fentanyl deaths in New York and throughout the country. It's a problem deserving of this administration's attention, deserving of the Republican conference's attention. I'm proud to lend my voice in support of finally doing something at our southern border. I'd like to call up next Admiral Ronnie Jackson, my colleague from Texas. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say that, we're still in an era right now where the Biden administration and the Democrats are constantly talking about the public health crisis that's going on in the country with regards to COVID. I'll submit to you that the number one public health crisis that we have in this country right now is the fentanyl crisis. We have almost 200 young Americans that are dying every single day in this country because of fentanyl. And that is a problem that we don't need a vaccine for. That is a problem that we have the answer for. What we need right now is we need an effective head of state. We don't have an effective head of state right now. We need our president we need him to work with the Mexican government right now, and we need to go after these drug cartels that are pumping this fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, and all the other drugs that are crossing our border into our country every day. We have the means to do that. The Mexican government will gladly work with us. We have the tools that they need on their side to be successful as well. This is the time, my colleague had mentioned already, the efforts to bring the military into this. I think that we're at a point right now where that needs to be done. We need to bring our U.S. military into Mexico. We need to train the Mexican forces. We need to provide them the technology, the drones, anything else that they need to go after these cartels, to hit their production facilities, their logistical routes, and to kill the cartel themselves. They're public enemy number one as far as I'm concerned right now. I make the point all the time that our border has been neglected. It's not our job. I'm not the only member of the Texas delegation standing up here. It's not the Texas delegation. It's not the state of Texas. It's not the state of Texas' job to secure our border. That's the federal government's job. And that needs to start happening, quickly. And I will tell you, the one thing that's happening right now, in addition to the fentanyl, that's of utmost concern to me, is the fact that we have all these terrorists these potential terrorists that are crossing our border right now. When we walked away irresponsibly from Afghanistan and we abandoned, thousands of ISIS fighters in a prison in Bagram, who knows where those people went? We know that they were dispersed all over Afghanistan, all over Europe, and some of them have probably made it at this particular point to our southern border right now. I will submit to you that we will find out that part of President Biden's legacy will be that it was on his watch that the next terrorist cell for the next 9/11 happened on his watch, because those people are crossing our border right now. We've had hundreds of them cross our border that we've caught, and those are the people that are going out of their way not to be captured, and we're catching some of them anyway. So you can only imagine how many of them are probably made it across our border right now. These are things that we need to take into consideration right now. I'm all about some of the other stuff that we're doing. I tell people all the time, I make the point that I want to see the Ukrainians. I want to see them defeat the Russians as much as anybody. But when I look as a member, as a citizen of the state of Texas and a citizen of this country, and I see what's happening in our country right now, I ask the question: how many Americans are dying in Ukraine every day right now? 0. There's 200 a day that are dying right here in this country because of the fentanyl crisis, and we have the means to do something about it, and we need to do it now. So thank you. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from Texas, who also leads our border caucus, Congressman Brian Babin.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Appreciate it. I'm very proud to be up here with all my colleagues talking about what is going on at our southern border and has been 2.5 years ago. I want to thank my colleagues and friends, especially Congressman Jim Banks and Congresswoman Ashley Hinson for holding this press conference, such an important issue. I think one of the most important issues that our country faces. Folks, it's no secret that this administration has utterly failed on our southern border. They can try to deflect all they want and say that Republicans are just trying to score political points, or that we're the ones that actually refuse to solve the problem, but nobody with a lick of sense is buying that line. This refusal to admit failure and to change course has gone on long enough. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, is finally recognizing that this is a real problem here. Even CNN is calling a spade and begrudgingly admitting that we do in fact have a border crisis. Even with members of his own party warning of irreversible problems, Biden and his crack team, I say that facetiously, border czar Vice President Harris and Secretary Mayorkas have stayed on message and avoided uttering a single word, border, as much as humanly possible when they speak in front of the public. And to add fuel to the fire, Biden sits down with Mexican President Obrador to discuss regional issues and emerges with a 6-step plan to what? To secure our shared border? No. There was never even much of a discussion at all, from what I read, of securing the southern border between the two presidents. No, that would make too much sense. They come out with a multi-step commitment to solving the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and naturally always climate change. The left really has a proclivity for grammatical gamesmanship, don't they? These words do not mean what one traditionally believes them to mean. They are, of course, riddled with nuance and not so hidden agendas. Unbelievably, the Biden administration is the first in our nation's history, the very first administration to actually welcome illegal immigration. They actively rebuff policies from past administrations, even ones in which they were serving in the White House at the time, that would prevent illegal immigration. It's astonishing, it's dangerous, and frankly, it is illegal. People are dying, as we've heard already from my colleagues up here. 100,000 a year dying of overdoses. Biden must secure the border. Stop these overdoses. Stop the illegality. It is poisoning America's 18 to 45-year-olds to where that is now the main cause of death for that age group. We will not stop beating the drum from the top of the mountain until he does. And I encourage everyone to do the exact same thing. We must stop this national suicide at our southern border. I want to thank you, and with that, I'll yield the mic back to Jim Banks. Ashley Hinson, thank you again. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, I think you've heard very clearly from my colleagues and myself. Accountability is here. We are going to be asking these tough questions of the administration and making sure that the American people's will and voice is heard. And with that, we're happy to answer a couple of questions.
Hi, I have two, one for you, one for Congressman Banks. On the immigration front, I wanted to ask you if you think there are any bipartisan points of commonality from even just a House perspective, putting the White House aside, where you think those points of commonality are. And then on a Hoosier State note, if I could have your reaction to the finding of classified documents at the former Vice President's Indiana home.
Let me answer the first part of that question. I think what it comes down to is the conversation around immigration reform cannot happen until we have a secure border. It's very clear we've got terrorists, sex abusers, and the dangerous drug problems that need to be sorted out. And I think once we can come to consensus on that, then let's have a conversation about how we actually address with meaningful reform. I can tell you this, in the conversations we've already had with CBP, with ICE, they are being deliberately cut off at the knees from being able to do their job, which would stem a lot of the challenges that we've seen at our southern border. Again, 251,000, a new record of illegal encounters in the month of December.
We're here to talk today about the fentanyl crisis, the leading cause of death of Americans my age. I don't want to distract too much from that, but I will say I have never met a man in politics who has more integrity than Mike Pence. And what we know is that he handled the classified document situation at his home in Indiana with integrity, immediately alerted the authorities, and has done what he can to turn those documents back over to where they need to go. A very different situation from what Joe Biden how he has been handling his situation, and then a very different situation from the unprecedented raid for the first time in American history where one administration has used the Department of Justice to raid the home of a former president. So while there is a common linkage of classified documents, there are big differences between the three situations. I'm happy to talk in another place and time more about that because I don't want to distract from what I believe truly is the biggest crisis in America today that we have to confront and show leadership toward, that we're not getting leadership from Joe Biden or the current administration of the White House.
Next question.
Thank you. So one of your first bills on the border seems to be facing some delay because of some opposition from more moderate Republicans, the HR 29 Chick-fil-A's bill, and I know several of you have co-sponsored it. How are those talks looking like in terms of finding consensus on that, and do you expect to still come up this week, or when do you kind of expect that to be?
I'm not sure where negotiations stand, but what I think is important here is that our conference is united behind what you're hearing today, which is putting a stop to that dangerous flow of drugs across the southern border and making sure that our law enforcement at the southern border have the tools to actually enforce these laws. On the plane here today from Iowa, I heard from a family who has moved from El Paso to central Iowa because they are so tired of seeing their home get broken into. They actually fled the situation on the southern border. Per what happened with Jim's constituent, the young 20-year-old man who lost his life to dangerous fentanyl, I have a constituent who is afraid that the next pill his 15-year-old takes is the one that kills him. So again, those are the conversations that our conference continues to be united behind in making sure that we hold this administration accountable and move forward with meaningful policy changes that will help to fix these problems that the Biden administration has created.
We have time for just one more question.
We'll leave it back.
So I think we sort of see two pictures being painted of the southern border, the public health and national security crises that you guys have laid out today. The much rosier picture, obviously, that the Biden administration is laying out. I think his visit was the first time he had ever been to the border in his 82 years. What do you think explains the discrepancy between what you guys see and the priorities of the Biden administration of DEI? You know, Vice President Harris was in Arizona, not for the border, but to promote green energy. What do you guys wish they would see to understand the problems that, you know, you and your communities are dealing with?
I think they just need to talk with these people and actually go and hear directly from them. We have all been to the southern border. Obviously, you have members of the Texas delegation here that are literally living this every day. Those communities experience this every single day. Our communities get a taste of that by what makes its way into Iowa and Indiana and other states, for example. But if they took the time to actually go hear those stories directly from the agents, hear from their local law enforcement, like we're hearing about the dangerous meth and the dangerous fentanyl that continues to make its way and drive crime in Iowans' backyards. If they took the time to do that, I think they would see very clearly why their policies for diversity, gender inclusion, and Green New Deal conversations, replanting grass, for example, at the southern border instead of actually enforcing the southern border, their priorities are woke and misguided. Jim, would you like to add to that? Okay. Thank you, everybody. That's